Hey, Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to be with me here today.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
So, let's start off with a set of rapid fire questions. The first question I have for you is, what is the one myth or misconception everyone has about lobbying?
So I think that the myth and misconception that people have, lobbying tends to suggest that there's these backroom deals being cut in some smoke-filled room over drinks. Um, that doesn't necessarily represent the interest or the greater interest of the general public. And while I'm sure that may happen in some circles, that's generally not what the practice is. And I think that's the biggest misconception, is that there are some kind of shady dealings that happen in the lobbying world.
What is the one skill you think is essential for someone to become a good lobbyist?
The most essential skill is really to be a good listener, um, both listener and observer. And I package them into one skill. Obviously, to listen, you need to observe, not only with your ears, but with your eyes.
What would you be if you weren't a lobbyist?
Oh, without doubt, a musician. Without a question.
Yeah, I can certainly say that for sure because now I can see your guitars and everything.
Yeah.
What is your favorite book or movie?
Wow, that's a good one. So, wow, that's a really good one. So, movie, I tell you the one that pops up in my head immediately is Inception. Um, and particularly the score for that movie was a masterpiece. I listen to movie scores just as intently as I watch a movie, and the score for the movie Inception was a masterpiece. Book, I think I read. I'm an avid reader, so I'll try not to pick a book like I just read that's fresh in my mind. Americana, Americana. That was an excellent book. I'm
Okay.
kind of yes, excellent, excellent book. So I'll put that one as my book.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's Zimmerman, right? Who's the background score for Inception, right?
Yes, yes. Zimmerman is Zimmerman could do no wrong. It's a masterful.
Amazing.
Uh,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
oh yeah, it's really amazing.
Do you have any role models in your life?
Yeah, so I think I've been fortunate to have a number of people present in my life that really exemplified what I think to be really important attributes. And the first one that comes to mind is my grandfather, Marion Burke Sr., who just really, from determination and hard work, was able to really build a comfortable life with just having a basic sixth grade education. He was born in Atlanta, Georgia in 1902. Due to the times where racism was very prevalent in the country, and particularly in the South, he wasn't able to pursue an education. So he learned a skilled trade, and with that skilled trade, was able to build himself a house and build apartment building, and eventually really grow to ascend to the middle class and provide a good life for my father, who then certainly passed that down to me. And so certainly my biggest role model would be my grandfather, without a doubt.
That is inspiring. So, what motivates you to be doing what you're doing?
So in my current role, and maybe we'll talk about that a little more, I represent a large state university, and I think the opportunity um, to really engage different people. And so best thing about my job and my role is that no 2 days are the same. And so every day presents new challenges and new opportunities. It gives you the chance to really learn different things about yourself, to develop different skills, because you have to approach different opportunities that you have with a completely clean slate often. And so I think there's not a better career for me. Um, not one who could do something repetitive. I have to have the ability
Okay.
to create and to do things that I find to be fun and different. And so it's a very non-routine job, which to me is just the greatest thing, is that I don't have a routine. My day changes by the hour often. And so one minute I can be sitting next to the mayor, and in the next hour, I may be with a group of fifth graders. And so they can't think of more distinguishedly different sets of people to spend time with. And so I am very grateful for the opportunity I have.
Well, that's awesome. I think we'll probably dig into it more when we get into your career. So with that, let's jump into the past. Can you talk us a little bit about your childhood, early childhood, and your school years as to how it was? And did you grow up in Atlanta?
No, no. So I grew up in a suburb of Chicago. Um, Early years, I attended Catholic school up until the fifth grade in our neighborhood. The Catholic school was actually right behind our house, so it was I think a great experience that is often lost today for kids who tend to live a lot of, well, at least we live in the suburbs now, that's not as walkable. And I think when you live in a community where you can walk to the grocery store, where you can walk to your school, it actually builds community better because you're on the sidewalk. So it's a lot different than being in a vehicle driving through. When you're able to walk someplace, you get connected to your environment. And so my childhood was just that. I was able to walk to school. The baseball field was behind the school. And this, again, when I say it was behind our house, it was maybe 400 yards from my back door. So it was, I could walk out of my door and get to school in 3 minutes. And so that was great. And so for my early years to be able to walk to the Catholic school behind our house. From there, we moved to a different suburb in Chicago. My mom and dad separated, and so I stayed with my mom. The one thing that I took from my dad in that time was my dad was a jazz pianist. And so music was always very, very present in my life from as long as I can remember. There was always, there was jam sessions in the basement. There was a lot of noise. There was always a lot of practice and people around. And so I started playing instruments at a very young age. And so when my parents separated and I moved with my mom, that continued, and I continued playing music throughout all of my primary and secondary educational years. When I graduated from high school, actually, from competing in music competitions throughout high school, I was actually awarded the opportunity for a governor's music scholarship, which were very common at that time. This was in the 80s. Music programs were, I think, probably at their peak during the 60s, 70s, and 80s, before the Federal Department of Education started cutting back funds for that during the Reagan administration. And so I was able to excel in that field of music. And I chose not to pursue. The ironic thing is that receiving that opportunity to go study music on a full scholarship and then choosing not to do that. And the reason I chose not to do that was because of my father. And so, again, being the teenage angst and rebel years, and being that my parents had separated, I think the default was to blame him. And even though, as an adult, you realize that's usually not how relationships and marriages go. There's equal blame to go around. But as a youth, just to blame him. And so my way of rebelling against him and his way was to say, hey, I'm not doing music anymore. And of course, I never forget him saying, you're going to regret it. You should never, don't turn your back on music. It's in you. You can't turn away. And so, but I didn't choose that path. And as you can see from the wall full of guitars behind me, he was right. He actually ultimately was right. It is in me, and I could not walk away from it.
So after your high school, what made you pick the Bachelor of Science in Sociology?
Yeah, so after that, I started off. So I tell you, I started. That was my third. It wasn't even in my peripheral for a field of study. I started off just majoring in business, and that was my first start. Just because I didn't really know. This was in 1985, and so kind of early tech years, pre-tech years, before um, personal computers were in every house, right? So back then, you had, if you were lucky, you had a typewriter that had a delete function built in, and then eventually became a word processor where you'd have the little bitty 1-inch screen to see your words before you finish that line of type. So I didn't grow up in an era where PCs were in every house. So at that time, I thought, well, business seems like, that encompasses a lot. It's a broad sounding major. And I failed to mention neither one of my parents at that time had gone to college, had graduated from college. They both went to college, but neither had graduated from college. And so I didn't really have a model for college around me. So I majored in business because that seemed like a fine major. And after taking accounting, quickly realized, okay, I don't like this at all, and switched to mass communications.
Hmm.
And so mass comm, because again, I enjoyed engaging with people. I thought, hey, I could see myself as a radio personality maybe. And so I did that. And what I found was, while I did enjoy, and I did enjoy the mass communications part, and the writing, I was a little indifferent on the writing aspect of it, but still I enjoyed the field of study. But what I found was my elective classes in social science were the ones I always liked the most. And so whether that was some type of psychology course or sociology course, those were the fields of study that I actually enjoyed the most. And so I finally just said, why am I trying to fit this circle into the square box? Why don't I just change majors? I mean, because I knew every semester I was always excited to look for what elective sociology or any social science class I could take as an elective. And that was what I looked most forward to during my college years. And it just made sense to say, hey, I might be forcing something that I don't really want to pursue. Why don't I just chase this thing that is of most interest to me? And the part that was interesting to me was because I just found the study of human behavior and the study of social systems to be fascinating. Human behavior being the psych part, and the whole system of that being the sociology part, being just a fascinating thing.
And with that degree, did you find any specific course or class which was particularly helpful in your career, which you can distinctly remember?
So yes, I think certainly in undergraduate research methods, and had a professor by the name of Dr. Donald Martin, who taught the research methods course. And I, at least up until that point, didn't know that I liked doing research. I just thought, oh, you do papers throughout secondary school, of course. And then when you move into college, you always have papers to write, and whatever, in many of your classes, English, if you take some type of literature course, there's always a writing course. And so you typically have papers and things you had to do. And at that point, I didn't really care for that. I didn't really like, oh, you got to write a 10-page paper on, some topic. And so it's like, especially in history classes and so and whatnot. So I didn't really care for that. But what I did find that, wow, when you're actually engaged in doing research, through a research methods class, you're actually collecting large amounts of data. You're using statistical analysis and regression modeling to actually look at how if one element or one of your metrics shifts a little bit, what that means actually in practice. It was just a fascinating thing to me to actually be able to come up with a hypothesis, go out and test that hypothesis using empirical data, and then conclude based on metrics that present in that data. That was just a fascinating thing. And I think while you don't necessarily remember the different theories that you might have in courses like that, you definitely remember something like research methods, because I then, as my career moved on, I've been able to use that to continue to put into practice. I continue to do research, and I attribute that to that research methods course to give me the foundation for that.
Interesting. And is there a difference between sociology and social science?
No, it's just one of the social. So the sociology, I mean, the social sciences. If you think about it, it encompasses psychology, sociology, anthropology. What am I forgetting? Well, they're encompassed in that field where you think of the natural sciences as being chemistry, biology, physics, geology. Those are natural sciences. The social sciences all deal with people. And so I just found the social sciences to be really attractive. I enjoyed my anthropology class just as much as I did the sociology classes, but it was just that element of humanism that I probably enjoyed the most. And so that's what attracted me to the social sciences, kind of writ large, regardless of discipline, kind of writ large. I was just attracted to the human component of science. And that's where you find in the social sciences and the humanities field of study.
Okay. And so what happened after that? Looks like you went on to get a master's degree. Is that right, in public policy?
Yeah, so from there, what you quickly realize when you graduate with a bachelor's degree in most social sciences fields, whether it be psychology, sociology, or anthro, there's not many employment opportunities. So you're like, well, what am I going to do? And so if you want to stay in those fields to really make a career in that space, PhD is the route that you should embark on. And so at that time, I thought, well, I don't know that I want to go to school right now for another 4 to 6 years. Let me just bite off the next 2 years. And I had to work some, so I figured it would be 2.5 years. It was actually 2 full years instead of 2 academic years. And let me just take a smaller bite and go and pursue a master's degree. Well, a master's degree in social sciences don't necessarily have a clear payoff. And what I mean by that is there's not many careers that you're going to pursue directly with just that master's degree in sociology. And so I started looking at what else seemed interesting, and the field of public policy was intriguing because to me, at least, it was kind of this blend of political science and social, kind of sociology, social science. So it was kind of this blend. And so I went the public policy route and thought that too was very fascinating to understand, as I like to say, how the sausage is made. So we know how things play out in day-to-day life and how laws exist and how regulations exist. But what we don't see as general citizens is the policies that go into play behind the scenes that enable or dictate how localities are governed, how the federal government is even governed. We don't really see that as a common citizenry unless you kind of pull back the curtain and start diving into those policies.
Mm-hmm. And so would you say that was your first stumble across public policy and politics? Is that the first time?
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah,
And,
without question. That was definitely, for me, that was the first, because I didn't really follow politics or have much interest in it pre that time. And it wasn't until I was kind of well immersed in graduate school that I started to really take an interest in how impactful, how much policy controls not just the way we live, but where we live, how we live, who gets what. I was just intrigued by that.
And did you get into the degree keeping something as a goal, like as to, okay, let me graduate with this degree so that I can get into lobbying or government relations or anything like that? Or you just were just fascinated, just you wanted to learn that stuff and then figure out what would happen next?
Yeah, so I think I well, I'll say when I finished, what I thought I wanted to do was go work in local government. And so like my path was like, okay, I'm gonna do this. It's kind of a clear road. And for people who go to get graduate degrees in public policy, there's kind of these two, and I'll call them like parallel tracks or focus areas. Like one is to kind of go the local government or any local, state, or federal. So any realm of government. And that's kind of one track, right? The other track, though, is to kind of look at nonprofit or some type of service providing entity that has some type of social impact. And so those are kind of the two parallel routes that I was looking at. But initially, I just thought, hey, I'll go work in local or state government because I have this kind of like knowledge base about how policies are done and what happens behind the curtain, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. So what happened after you got your degree? Did you get what was your first stint and how did you get it?
So let's see, what was after my first, so after I graduated, so my first job post-graduate school, well, so I actually started on this kind of career path. While in my second year of graduate school, I went to work for an organization that was started by former President Jimmy Carter, who's a native Georgian, called the Atlanta Project. The Atlanta Project, so Jimmy Carter to this day is probably best known for all of his humanitarian efforts that he does in developing countries around the world. And so the Atlanta Project was his kind of effort to take the focus that he had globally, particularly in Africa, to take that focus and bring it locally. And so through several focus areas, education, public health, public safety, oh gosh, safe community. I'm not going to remember all six, it was 6 core areas. But through these 6 core areas, what the Atlanta Project was going to do is to focus in some of the most challenged and underserved communities in Atlanta. Because in most American cities, and I don't, unbeknownst to, I think many folks, is the challenges that you see persist in third world or developing nations. Some of those same challenges exist right in your own neighborhood. They exist in many American cities, but they're typically in places where middle class and upper class America don't visit. And so what the Atlanta Project sought to do was really focus hardly and very intently on those communities that were right here locally in our own backyards, instead of just having this focus over in other countries. And so that was such a great experience. It was such a great way to kind of, it was a great education to really see the challenges that poverty brings, what that really means in community. People know what poverty means, but when you actually see what it does to community, what it does to the people there, and how it limits and restricts the outcomes and potential for people, it's harrowing and something that you feel compelled to want to do something about.
Mm-hmm. So that was when you were getting your master's degree. That was like an internship, or was it after you graduated you got
Yeah,
it?
so it was part of both. So in the program I was in, you had to do this internship for, oh gosh, it was a minimum of, I want to say 400 hours, something around there. It was so you had a number of hours that you had to complete in order to finish the program. And so common to most graduate programs, you have to do some type of capstone to finish the program. Obviously, if you go the PhD route, you have to do a dissertation. But so the program I was in, what your capstone was based on that internship experience, and it had to be a minimum, I want to say, of 400 plus hours, which would be 40 hours a week for 10 weeks. And so mine actually lasted a year. And what you do your capstone at, you basically write, you do research on the entity that you're working for, in my case, the Atlanta Project, and you really look deeply at what their model was, how you do some field work and empirical research to determine how impactful it is. You make recommendations for things that could change to help it be improved. And that was mine. And so it was just a great opportunity because you had essentially the city as your laboratory. So your subject matter that you're studying, that in the natural sciences you would study in a controlled environment inside of a lab. In this case, the city of Atlanta and some of the most challenged and impoverished communities was the lab to do the study. And so it was a great opportunity, really phenomenal. I learned a lot from it.
Interesting. So after that was when you actually got a position with the Greater Atlanta Home Builders Association. Is that right?
Yeah, well, so actually it was another stint in between there. So before I went to the Home Builders Association, I went to Chicago to the American Planning Association, and I was a research associate there. And the American Planning Association is also the entity that accredits urban planning programs in university, and also accredits the field of urban planning. So the American Institute of Certified Planners is the accreditation arm of the American Planning Association. And I did research there for 2 years prior to returning back to Atlanta. I was in Chicago, and I came back to Atlanta and took a job with the Greater Atlanta Home Builders Association.
So how did you get the position with the Greater Atlanta Home Builders Association?
Completely accidental. It was truly one of those moments where I might have saw it in the classifieds. This was still, there were job postings, but this was not, there was no monster.com at this time. There were no large websites dedicated to employment at that time. So you hit the good old paper and pulled the classified ads. And I saw it in the classifieds, and I just, oh, this seems like a cool job, I'll apply. And I just wrote a letter and applied, and I ended up getting the job.
So I mean, how did you think that whatever you were working on does relate to this position? Because this was like, it's like government affairs, and you probably have to be at the Georgia State House or something like that, right?
Right.
So you've never been to the Georgia State House before, but how did you think that the skills would match? Was it just like a...
Yeah, so I mean, it was interesting. So I really didn't know what to expect, and quite honestly, didn't know what I was getting myself into. I just knew that I was comfortable being in any room. I can walk into pretty much any room of people, and I'm comfortable. I don't have really. I'm pretty comfortable in any environment, and I actually like being in environments where the majority of the people in the environment aren't necessarily like me, because there's a lot to be learned in those spaces. And so I was okay with it. And but I just think, going back to the question you asked about the most important skill that you need, it's the observation, it's the listening, right? So I'm like, well, I don't know a whole lot. I know practically about like land use, and I know about zoning, because from doing this 2 years of research, which was probably why I was an attractive hire, I knew a lot about land use, and I knew a lot about regulations, because I had done 2 years of research at kind of the capstone, if you will, the centerpiece of that field at the American Planning Association. And so I knew a lot about that topic, but walking into an unfamiliar space, what I was going to do, I decided was I just need to listen, observe, and learn. And so I did that for a good stretch. Just listen, learn, observe, figure out who the players are, figure out, get to know people, just on no agenda, just, hey, let's have a cup of coffee. I'd love to learn about, what are the concerns in your district? That kind of question. Because I didn't have an agenda. My job is, as far as I saw, it was just to get to know people.
Mhm. And can you talk us through what kind of policies did you work on while you were at the Atlanta Home Builders Association, and maybe in general explain what is that association for?
Yeah, so the Greater Atlanta Home Builders Association is a trade association, which is generically in tax terms, most people are familiar with nonprofits being referenced as a 501c3. Well, trade associations are 501c6s, meaning they're membership organizations. That is, for whatever industry they represent, there are companies, individual companies, in this case, home builders, that pay a membership fee to be part of this organization. And the organization advocates on behalf of the industry. And so that's what trade associations do. They advocate on behalf of their industry. And so, I mean, one that people would be really familiar with would be like AAA, American Automotive Association, or if you're a sports fan, any Players Association. So the NFLPA, the NFL Players Association, that group advocates on behalf of the NFL players when they negotiate contracts. It's why in sports there's sometimes season holdouts, and that's because there's a stalemate between the association, the advocacy group, and the owners, trying to iron out how they're going to be compensated. And so associations serve that role and that purpose. And so, for me getting into that, it was great. It was great to be in, especially in the city of Atlanta. Residential home building was really one of the top economic market drivers for this region. Well, we're in a little bit of a different time this year, but traditionally it continues to do pretty well.
Mm-hmm. And was there any specific policy which you can remember, which you particularly worked on?
I think the common thread through, and this is true probably of most trade associations, the common thread through them are really regulatory fees. And so for any industry, there are a set number of fees that are required. So in home building, for example, you pay fees to get a permit. You pay fees to get a sewer inspection. You pay fees to get an electrical inspection, et cetera. Same thing in most industries. There are fees that you pay local government to perform some task. And so I think, generally speaking, the regulatory fees are one of the things, in a nutshell, that advocacy industries typically watch. And so if this was, I don't know, say you're in the beverage industry, and there's a local government or a state government that's looking to impose a tax on drinks. This is the case of New York City, that's looking to impose an additional tax on drinks with some high level of sugar. Well, that's a fee, that's a tax, but a regulatory fee and additional things that cost your industry are a general practice of what you push back against, or at the very least, if you're paying the fee, to get service commensurate with the fee. So in other words, if I'm going to pay more for my fee for permits, am I going to get the permit faster? Is that going to improve my service? And that, again, that's the same across most advocacy groups. Is regulatory fees are the one thing that you tend to put a lot of focus on.
Mm-hmm. And is there anything which you learned, like if there was just one takeaway you had to talk about from that
Definitely.
experience, what would it be?
The one takeaway is, so elected officials tend to do what is asked of their constituency. And so decisions are made not necessarily not all, but I think the takeaway for me is the best lobbyist or the best advocacy group or advocacy individual for that matter is to provide education to both the public and the elected body. That's the best takeaway. It's like, if you want to be effective, your best tool is to not be a hardliner trying to push your agenda, because that to me is, I mean, yeah, you might win some, you're going to lose some too. But to me, that just doesn't serve uh, it didn't serve me well. I didn't see that as something, and people have that, some people, that's their approach. It's like, I represent this industry. I'm going to go in and say, this is our platform. This is what we stand for. And that's fine. My big takeaway, and I actually tried that too. And it worked. Again, it works sometimes it doesn't. What I found more rewarding though, were people are people. And if you approach people and say, I understand, and they have an opposing position, and you tell, I understand you have this opposing position. Well, let me tell you what that does. I'm just going to give you the information. I'll share with you what this says. I'll give you the information, and I'll leave it at that. And then you make the best decision. And your decision might not align with what our industry needs, but there is a cost, and here is the cost to that. And the same with the general public. It's just best to educate them, and don't try to harp on trying to sway them to see your point of view.
Mm-hmm. And just to one last final question about this career with the Home Builders Association. How do you educate the constituents? I mean, is there some sort of a tool you use, or how do you actually educate all the people?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple ways. So one is one of the best tools to do public education or any type of broad-based campaign that you're trying to educate people on is to, one, use short sentences that are short and concise. So, bullet points, something that there's a common saying is that, you need to be able to communicate your position above the fold. And what that is take a piece of paper, fold it in half. Everything you need to say needs to be in that half piece of paper. So, which is quite counter to the world of higher ed, which works on the opposite side of the spectrum, where a brief in higher ed might be 30 pages, or research, a research abstract might be a 10-page single-spaced document. But in general, kind of in the general sphere of society, I think brief to the point. And so that's one thing. The other thing is you need to use plain language. So don't use technical jargon. Don't use things that are only known inside the industry. Use very common, clear, concise sentencing, and no technical jargon. And what you're trying to convey is what said increase. So a good quick example, and this isn't in my industry, but this is one that resonates with people. If your local transit authority is going to do a 25% fee increase to ride the bus or your local rail, like what does that mean? And so for most people to take a train bus, that 25% increase, that's not a big deal. But for low income people, that is a big deal, particularly if you have to rely on that mode of transportation to get everywhere you need to go. And so if you figure 25%, 25 cents each way, and let's say, you have to travel, that's your mode, and you have to travel to and from work every day, that's 50 cents. And if you multiply that up, for every day, it adds up. And if you're already just barely making ends meet, if you're a low income individual, you can't necessarily afford that. And that's going to actually diminish, it could potentially diminish the purpose that you're trying to serve, right? Which is to provide transportation options for people so they don't have to drive. Well, you just wiped off a portion of the people you're actually trying to serve by doing that 25% fare increase. Yeah, and so that's a common argument. So I didn't tell you not to do it. I'm just telling you, this is through doing research, these are the consequences of that 25% fare increase, or that 25 cents fare increase, rather.
Yeah, fair enough. So what happened after the Atlanta Home Builders Association? It looks like you were the managing partner at Tapestry Consulting.
Yeah, so 2008, 2009, 2010, the last great recession that the country had, was probably the worst time to be in the home building industry. Of course, we saw the collapse of Lehman Brothers and large banking institutions. And so we saw kind of this catastrophic collapse of our economy. Worst time to be in an industry relying on bank financing. And so basically the Home Builders Association shrunk and went from a membership organization of about 4,000 member companies to about 1,000 or a little under 1,000. Full staff of about 30 to a full staff of about 5 or 6. And I was one of those casualties. But because I had been there so long and I had all the connections to how things were done locally and what were the important issues in the industry, they needed my expertise. And so what the agreement was okay, I'll leave and I'll set up a consulting company. And so basically what Tapestry did was I provided the same service I did as working at the Home Builders Association, except for I was providing that service as a consultant. And it was good for me too, because it also allowed me to pick up other clients. And so another client I actually served was the city of Atlanta. At that point, they had a program funded by HUD called the Neighborhood Stabilization Program, which was funding that went out across the country to kind of stabilize housing markets. And they needed someone that can actually ensure that the money that was going out to builders and communities to renovate housing, that money was actually being spent as it was supposed to. And the city was not staffed for somebody to go out and watch every house that received funding and make sure that they were doing the right thing. So I actually picked up a contract there to provide some of those inspection services to make sure that, yes, this house that received $40,000, they're actually doing more than just putting like a layer of paint on it. They actually did buy the new windows. They actually did put in, a new front porch and did do some interior remodeling. So I was able to do that on top of still do my government affairs role at the home builders, but I did that separate as a consultant.
And after the Tapestry Consulting, you moved on to Georgia Institute of Technology. How did you find that role? And can you talk us a little bit about what is it that you do today?
Yeah, sure. So I can't honestly remember how I found the Georgia Tech job. I'm thinking it was similar to how I found the home builder job. Like, hey, this seems like an interesting job. I'll apply. And that's what happened. I don't remember where I saw it, but that's what happened. I didn't hear him. I just applied. And because of the nature of what I've been doing for a long time, like, hey, we'll bring this guy in for an interview. Interviewed, ultimately got the position. And that was like a completely new world because now I'm in higher ed now. And so I'm in kind of this college atmosphere that's vastly different than the home building industry. And so it's a great place to be in just because you're around so many brilliant people at a great institution, great students, and it's just a very live and vibrant place to be.
And what is your role here? I mean, what kind of is this related to government affairs, or is it somewhat related to it?
Yeah, so our office, formerly, it's now called the Office of Institute Relations. It was formerly the Office of Government and Community Relations. And so we're the office that has direct connections to, we're a public state university. So we have direct ties to the state of Georgia. And so our office holds that relationship. And so that we coordinate with the University System of Georgia, which is the managing board of regents that oversees the whole system. So that's our state function, is to ensure that we are in compliance and working closely with the university system on goals and objectives that they hope for the system to pursue and provide for the state. The other part of that is federal government. And so we are a tier 1 research institution, so we do a lot of research. And so that same kind of synopsis I gave for the state connection, the federal side of our office does it at the federal level, and they are located in Washington, D.C. And then the kind of gray area outlier is the community relations portion, which is me. And so the easiest way to understand what my role is so anything that I just described except not federal or state. So it's like, I don't do federal, I don't do state, I fill in everything else. And so that's local government. So that'd be, in our case, the city of Atlanta. We are located in the center of the city of Atlanta. That would be nonprofits, any community entity, neighborhoods surrounding campus, churches, public schools, both public and private. And so in those spaces, and so I like to think that I have the funnest job of my colleagues who focus both on federal and state, because I get to do, I get to do a really wide array of things that are just a lot of fun. It's great to be able to see, bring a good number of middle school kids to campus, and it's just always exciting to see their faces light up when they see, some experiments being run and just see that light go on. And that's a lot of fun.
And before we conclude this talk, can you just talk us through on a day-to-day basis, like what is it that you do? And given all your profound experience, can you tell us, like, what is it that people should do to get into such a position? And do you feel like the career path you've chosen has finally led you to a place where you want to be in the next coming few years, or maybe beyond that?
Yeah, so I'll start at the end to go backwards. So absolutely, I really love the job I have. It's I'm very thankful and feel most blessed to have this opportunity, and kind of going back to where I started about just the ability to do different things. And so going backwards and answering that. So yes, love the job. Definitely could see I've been there over 9 years, and it really is amazing to think that I've been there that long, because everything just always, it feels fresh. It's not a place where you don't want to go to work. You actually are excited to go in. I think, just generally speaking, college campuses are incredible work environments, because again, where do you get to go to work where there are many brilliant people surrounding you? You have a lot of students surrounding you, also ambitious, bright, and just it leaves you with this sense of great optimism for our future. College campuses are rife with they're just lively places, and they're just places where thought is cultivated. You think about just hearing good speeches or the opportunity to hear good lectures. There are always people coming in campus to do lectures. There are always campus guests of prominence. And so they're just great places. They're just great cultural hubs that do so much, bring so much to a community, much more than I think what the general public may think outside, is that where they're places for teaching and learning. And they are places for teaching and learning, but they're also places for so much more. And they represent such great cultural relevance in our society. And so can't think of a better place or better work environment. And then the university that I'm at, being a really highly selective university, and just it's just very vibrant, and the campus is beautiful. Georgia Tech has a beautiful campus. We are on about 480 acres in the center of Atlanta. But when you're in campus, you feel like you're in this kind of oasis of just big, rich trees, and it doesn't look, and I hear this a lot from out of town visitors to come to campus, it doesn't look like what you would imagine a university campus to look like in the middle of a city. It actually feels like you could be anywhere. Once you're in campus, you don't even necessarily realize you're in the middle of a city. It feels like a college campus. And so that I love, and I love being there, just being able to exchange ideas with students and other really brilliant people is awesome. Day to day, what my role looks like is, it's very different. And so I mentioned one of the roles we play strongly is we serve as kind of liaisons between local government and schools. And so while we're not a program office, and so in other words, we don't offer like some type of computing program or computing workshop for kids. We don't actually do the program component. What we do is serve as the pipeline to communicate the offerings that we have on campus. So if there are summer camps, if there's weekend programming, We help promote those things, and we actually serve as kind of information sources to assure that the public is aware of all the campus activities that go on. And again, we're a state school, we're a public school. So I always like to tell people that I speak with, like, Georgia Tech is your school. You know, you live and work in Georgia. You pay, this is your school. You belong here. This is your campus. It is a public space. And so my role largely is to make sure that I'm communicating that message to the public, and not just communicating, but making sure that they feel welcome. And so much like in your own house, if someone comes over, you play a house guest, you want to make them feel welcome and make them feel like you want them there. That is what I see my central role being at Georgia Tech. And so whether you're coming into campus or whether I'm just out in the general public, what I am going to convey and try to represent is that I want you to come to campus. I want you to come have an experience here. And I'm going to make sure that if you have an interest in coming to visit, whether you're a kid or you're an adult, we're going to make that happen. And so that's probably the funnest part of the job. And doing the same, you know, particularly with business, people who run and own businesses, there are tons of things at most research institutions that touch some form of ways to improve your business, whether that be through an actual product enhancement, whether that be through understanding efficiency and business and strategic planning. But there's something that goes on most universities that reach deeply into that have tentacles into the business community. And so I'm also able to do that. And so going to big, whether this be a corporate type of luncheon or a corporate setting, through like a chamber of commerce where there are business owners and business people there, I can bring that same level of engagement to them that I would bring to, you know, a third grade class that I'm trying to help get interested in computing. And so that's just a wonderful thing. But that's literally how different the day-to-day is. It could be that dynamic where I'm at a luncheon with the Chamber of Commerce where there are businesses, business leaders, and then next thing you know, I'm in a middle school, standing in front of a classroom, talking to kids about STEM. And so it's just it's a phenomenal opportunity. It's a lot of fun. Again, there's not many dull days.
That's very eloquently put, and so you certainly have all the skills which are needed for someone to become the director of communication relations. Thank you so much again, Chris, for taking the time to spend it with me. I really did learn a lot from your experience. And
Okay.
yeah, so thank you again, and hopefully we'll meet sometime soon.
Yeah, so stay in touch. It's been a pleasure. Take
All
care.
right, thank you.